Kaylan, I'm so glad to have you here today. It's been incredible to get to know you and to dive into everything from Gotham and understanding your background as a lawyer, and then now as the CEO of a new company, Magnetic. And if you can kick us off by just where are you calling in from and what are you working on these days?
I'm calling in from Brooklyn, New York. And the things I'm working on these days are, as you noted, Magnetic is a digital memberships platform for the Web3 space powered by blockchain. I am a former but still barred attorney who did venture capital and mergers and acquisitions work for the better part of a decade and a half. And I also am a co-founder of Gotham Labs, which you know well, which is a Web3 venture and execution studio focused on impact results. So those are my current projects. I've also started a company called Blockchain in Maine, which is a blockchain education and consulting company. So I've really gone full bore since about 2017 into the blockchain space, getting deeper and deeper every day.
I love this question. I love to get started with just, knowing what your first ever investment was because, we all start from somewhere. What got you started?
I started angel investing many years ago, actually, with a group called Pipeline Angels. And my first investment was one of the cohorts that I was a participant in. We collectively voted and diligenced a company called Apothecary, which is a compact humidor for both weed and tobacco. So it was pretty early in broader acceptance, and whether or not it was going to make it was a really regulatory was an interesting aspect of our diligence process. But the founder's incredible, and we really believed in her vision and her capacity to execute. So that was actually very exciting. It was less of a traditional investment and more straight into direct angel investing.
I'd love to know, how did you decide to first take this path as a lawyer? What drew you to this world of Web3 or blockchain or, whatever you want to call it?
I studied international business in college, and I had a professor. One of my just requisite courses was business law. And I had a professor who I ended up absolutely loving. He's still a mentor to this day. But it was the hardest class I took. Honestly, I think I was so engaged because it was so challenging and it really required my attention and my constant participation. We had pop quizzes, or the professor flipped a coin every class to see if we would have a pop quiz. So you always had to be up on your reading. It wasn't something that you could wait until the end of the semester and cram. And I just was fascinated by corporate transactions. I knew I wanted to go into M&A strategy early on. And I saw going into law as a way to kind of skip a couple rungs on the ladder, or at least in my head, that's what I was going to do, because I figured I could go be an analyst for a number of years and start working my way up, or I could learn transactions from the inside out from the legal perspective and be structuring them, negotiating them, diligencing them, all of that. So I was one of few people that I went to law school with who actually knew they wanted to be a corporate lawyer. So many folks were focused on courtroom, like litigation and trials, appellate law, whatever it was. They were really focused on that aspect of it. And I was in small classes with folks who were really dedicated to the transactional angle. And that was amazing. So that was how I got into my legal career. And I spent a long time. I thought I would be out in a few years. I thought I'd burn out. And 2 to 3 years in, I figured that's my plan. I'll then lateral over into sort of an M&A strategy role somewhere and then continue climbing. But honestly, I never left because I just genuinely liked it. I loved the people I worked with. I was very fortunate to work with incredible people. A lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about big law. And there are plenty of challenges there, but I was very lucky and genuinely loved my job. So I just ended up not leaving.
And then what about Web3? Like, how did you go from law to saying, I'm going to help work on like Gotham and Magnetic and all of this?
Also kind of odd story. I was back in 2017 dating a now still good friend, but I was dating a guy who worked overseas, and they were all ex-military who were suddenly in these very sort of 9 to 5 roles at the embassy. And they just had, honestly, they had time on their hands. They now didn't know what to do outside of combat. And they all got into crypto in an investing and a trading perspective. And I just had questions about it. I thought it was interesting, and I would just ask questions. And they had Telegram groups and, chat groups and things like that, where they would all talk to each other about technical analysis and strategy. And they were so gracious in just letting me be sort of a voyeur for a while, watching what they were talking about and learning, just absorbing the language, the vocabulary, the approach. And that was a really gentle easing in, because I had nothing at stake. I was still a lawyer for, I still am, but I was just an observer. And I really happened to love math. So technical analysis was something that just really, kicked off a spark in my brain. And I just thought, oh, how interesting. And I had never traded equities, and I wasn't sure I wanted to trade crypto. I just wanted to learn about it. So that was probably my foray into it initially. And then blending the legal background, one of my co-founders of Gotham used to be my legal client. And because I happened to know a lot about crypto in the not early for early adopters' sake, but like still early days in 2017, 18, 19, right? Those were the days where people were still having questions about, can I take private investment? I'm raising a venture round. Is there a way I can take that in cryptocurrency? Those sorts of questions were being floated around the ecosystem, and not a lot of folks could answer them. I wasn't sure I could answer them either, but I could speak very capably about the pros and cons, right? And so that jump-started a few of my clients thinking, oh, wait a minute, she actually understands this space, knows what's going on. Maybe we should strategize. Maybe we should actually talk to her more about the high-level strategy instead of simply the on-the-ground questions. And that is how one of my co-founders, Josh Thompson at Gotham Labs, and I started working together. And our third co-founder, Thanasi, is somebody that Josh worked with for a long time. So that was a really organic entry into really formalizing my dedication to the space. And then Magnetic was built out of Gotham pipeline, where we were meeting folks in the space. I met Tyler and Matt through Gotham, and we are now co-founders of Magnetic, where we decided to work on something that would be a genuine onboarding mechanism, right? We wanted to say, how do we expand access to the space? Right now, it's still pretty tricky to get in. You have a lot of hurdles to surmount, and when I talk to my parents about blockchain, and they are so receptive and they take notes, and it's wonderful. But do I think that it's yet at the point where it would be easy for them to operate in the space? Absolutely not. They're still like seed phrases, store it in, put it in a safe, bolt that to the bottom of the basement. Like, I have to do what now? Keep these phrases secret, and I have to connect what to what and store this where. So Magnetic is really the endeavor there is to onboard people through a very natural set of mechanisms. We can talk about that anytime you like, but that's really how the journey has brought me to this now full-time dedication to being the founder and CEO of Magnetic through all of those individual channels preceding.
I love that. What a journey. It just builds such a story of like how these things happen really organically, and just how little micro moments can build to something that ultimately is a career. And I would love to dive more into magnetics. When I think about like the role you play in the wealth space and why it's important, can you talk about some of those mechanics and like that natural flow that you're helping people to onboard with through Magnetic?
Right. Absolutely. So being a digital membership platform, we are facilitating the connectivity and the two-way conversation between brands and consumers. And, studies show that some 80 to 81% of consumers desire, a better relationship with the brands that they love, a closer relationship with the brands that they love. And what are brands looking for? It's customer acquisition and retention, right? How do we find our newest customers? And then once we have them, how do we keep them? And we see this two-way conversation as truly the key to loyalty and commitment between each other, because in the digital age, attention is so scattered. It's new brands pop up every day. There's competition everywhere. And our attention spans are shorter than ever. So really building a feeling of community is paramount. Making people feel like they belong to something is incredibly important. And so what we're doing is we've created the tooling to facilitate that relationship. And so a brand can come onto our platform in a completely Web 2 fashion. We're built on Flow. And our tooling makes the interface very familiar, clicking buttons that you already understand to launch a merch drop, ticket, IRL events, to do polls and quizzes and feedback and trivia, whatever it is that you want to do. The sky's the limit as far as creativity of a brand. We are building the tooling to roll that out so they don't have to go find 17 different vendors to establish, token gated content, all of these things that we see as opportunities to create and build community. On the other side of the platform, users who join and want to engage with their favorite brands and, buy into one of these memberships, sign in with an email address and password. It is, we've partnered with Dapper Wallet, and we are using their technology to make this process, this onboarding, as seamless as possible. They can pay with credit card, fiat currency. They don't have to buy crypto. But all the while, underneath, you are getting the benefits of transparency, composability, liquidity opportunity, all of these elements of blockchain that make it so much more powerful. We just feel like people don't really need to know how it works. We're not secretive about it. We're happy to, we're also using this as like a teaching platform. It's a great on-ramp. And once they're there, we're going to have educational resources. So if they want to dig in and understand what NFTs are, awesome. We love that. But you don't need to understand it before getting the actual value out of it. So that's the way Magnetic is built. And that's why we see it as such a great onboarding opportunity, because when there's already a brand you love, that is sort of the carrot that draws you in. And then if we can be the ones to shepherd you in by showing you how easy it is to engage and then get your benefits and perks and rewards through that one unified user experience, that is where we see folks will become a little bit more comfortable with new technology, and it removes a lot of the friction. So that's, the underlying objective is onboarding, but we're doing it in a way that is great. Here's something you already know you want. Come on in, the water's fine.
I love this so much. I mean, we're seeing just a proliferation of membership, loyalty type functionality that is feeling like a much more natural, safe, and also like compliant use case. There were so many early experiments like FWB and index co-op and securities questions and all these things. It just, felt really scary for people who are owners and leaders of communities. What do you think has been the most exciting thing that you've learned about those communities and the structures, and then understanding the true regulatory landscape of it all as you've been building Magnetic, and having that in consideration of what's realistically usable for founders and leaders of communities that are looking to coordinate and bring their members online?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, I think the answer is we genuinely have no idea what's compliant. And that's mostly because regulations are in flux. We see Top Shot getting called into question, NBA Top Shot as a security. Now, nobody has stated that it is a security yet, but it's not a security, right? So the SEC is open to investigating. All of the regulatory bodies are in exploratory mode. And I think that can be very scary for founders. I think it's a fair friction point. Honestly, it's tough because you don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of folks who are trying to tokenize loyalty are now backing away from that opportunity because they're looking at it going, well, I don't know, are these tokens going to present an issue? What are the tokenomics? Is that going to get called into question? The last thing we want to do, even if we really and truly believe in the impact of this space, the last thing we want to do is end up, being sort of stymied in our business proposition and rerouted to constantly in defense mode. So I think for folks to really go the distance, at least now the safest route is to know that you're delivering value, right? Like that you are having your customers or your community members buy in to something that is actually delivering value, that there's an exchange rather than ascribing value to, the work of others or financial speculation or tokenizing something that perhaps doesn't need to be tokenized that everybody just kind of hopes goes up, right? Like those are really consistent themes that have, we've seen emerge over the past few years. And unfortunately, I think they're getting knocked down, and it's a landscape that's full of uncertainty. And the best thing that founders can do is know that they are delivering sort of an exchange of value and saying, at least we understand, okay, if you're going to pay in for this and we're going to return you that is a commercial transaction at its core, and we're going to anchor to that, right? You can get creative in this space, and the digital environment is always going to be full of nuance and rich with exploration. But to know that you've sort of anchored to core principles is about as safe as you can get, and everything else, for better or for worse, is up for debate.
This is why, it's so important to have like a legal guide, somebody who is a strategic thinker. Obviously, it's something that people identified as a real benefit of being associated with you, with Gotham, with the agencies that you have. And how, navigating this can be really difficult, because in most industries, when you look out to the competitive landscape, you can actually copy and like pull and lift and adapt. In crypto, you can't copy anything, right? Because the chances are,
know what's safe.
Yeah, like just because it exists doesn't mean it's allowed or like regular.
That's exactly right. That's 100% right.
Go and copy, what's in the ecosystem, because you don't know who their lawyers are, or the diligence that's been done, or the structures that have been put in place, and the thought that's been actually put behind the infrastructure. And I think that can be really scary for founders who may get really inspired by what they're seeing in the ecosystem, but ultimately like need to dedicate some pretty significant resources to have strong leadership in the legal sphere and the regulatory compliance sphere. And even then, the best of the best are either going in-house to these big protocols or don't really know. It hasn't been defined. It is very much in like an exploratory phase, like you mentioned. So I think it's so fascinating. Like, one of the discussions that came up recently after a conference was the idea of like consumer protections and what information can be available to people who are under 18 years old. So things about like sexual content or alcohol or cannabis, for example. And obviously there was like this influx of DAOs and maybe NFTs or partnerships that and even brands going online that may have like alcohol or cannabis, which are legal, but need to be sort of like opt-in. I'm over the age of 18, and the fact that blockchain is public ledger, like it's just that information, there is no filter mechanism for that. So it's like just such a simple thing like that, I think, opened my eyes to, you make these decisions and you may be taking steps into innovation, but not thinking about how those things intersect with all the other things that are in place and are real, legislation and regulation to consider. So such a fascinating place. Is there a person or a company in the space that inspires you, with that caveat of like, you can't be inspired because it's all like, who knows?
I really do think that, however, widespread and generic this may sound, but like, I am just excited by people who are experimenting. I think you have to take calculated risks and understand the landscape as best you can, and then simply say, we're going to do the best we can with what we've got, right? There is never a perfect answer. And the most brilliant attorneys on the planet, I'm sorry to say, cannot save you, because right now we just don't have letter of the law by which to abide. And so there will be a lot of trial and error. And so I think that there are companies pushing the envelope that may be, unfortunately, taken down a few pegs. Their balloons may be popped, but I genuinely admire any and everyone who's pushing the space forward. And that ranges from major projects. I mean, like Moonbirds Proof has been in the crosshairs recently, but I think that they have genuinely done right by their community. You can dislike it, that's fine, but they are honest, open, transparent. Again, reasonable minds can disagree. All of it's subjective, but from something as large as of a target, right, as Proof Collective, but all the way down to, Heather from Coin Queens. There are a lot of people who are taking groups of individuals and increasing and impacting their knowledge and power within the space as individual users. So I genuinely could list 1,000 names within the space, but anyone who's standing up and saying, I believe in the future of this technology, I see the impact and I see the long-term viability, especially relevant as we're watching something like SVB collapse right now. Collapse may be a strong word, but but centralized financial institutions are unfortunately not looking much safer than what people were previously ascribing to the risk of a new decentralized ecosystem, right? So I think we just have to stay so open-minded and respect the people that are trying their best. And if they're doing so in good faith and it doesn't work out, bummer, right? But I respect so much people who are really trying to, make change happen and evolve into, something that's more of a democratized access to all of these previously centralized institutions, whether financial or otherwise, government, regulatory, probate, real estate. There are so many industries ripe for disruption. And I say that in a non-tech buzzwordy way, but they really can be turned on their heads if we have sort of the collective willpower to do so. And so the leaders that are picking up the flag and leading that charge, immense respect.
I love this. It brings up a lot for me because I don't want to even just say women, but anyone who identifies with more feminine traits, there is an aspect of just carefulness. And I like that there's the word care. It's like they genuinely care. And so they want to be careful. And that can be really tricky in a space that is pioneering. And to your point, you need to take calculated risks. So I'd be curious what advice you would give to someone getting started who we really do need more builders and leaders in the space who are careful and considerate and use critical thinking. But it can just be like, stop upon arrival because it's just like, well, it's so undefined. The compliant regulatory rules are not in stone, so I'm not even going to take that step. I just worry that we're going to miss some of the initial design and like really thoughtful architects in the space because it's so unclear and uncertain for people who may be needing a little bit more clarity to be careful and considerate and critical. What advice would you give to somebody trying to make a stand and be part of this?
That's an incredible question, actually. I really love that. I think that there has to be a little bit more belief in your own power, truly. And, we talked about this the other week, where I think women largely, and, non-binary femmes and those who identify with more feminine traits, like growing your own ego is really important. And I don't say that to be selfish or to say it in an egotistical manner, but it is a critical element in moving the needle sometimes. In an undefined space, you have to have a core belief in yourself and your power to, push through the difficulties. Excuse me, because think about it, if you end up in the crosshairs of, a regulatory issue, that's horrible and nobody wants to be there. But someone's going to end up there and someone's going to get to the other side of it. Why would you be any less capable of getting through it? And maybe you are the landmark case that establishes new precedent in an incredible opportunity for all of those behind you. Why not you, right? I think that oftentimes we associate care and carefulness with stopping before the consequence instead of believing in our power to get through it. If you're not operating with malice, you're not going to get pegged for fraud. So barring that, if you happen to wind up tangled in, the sheer fact that you're on the bleeding edge of tech, community building, whatever it is, you've gotten super creative. You've done something that's never been done before. And now, whoops, we've got to peel you back a little bit because we've decided that, this is not where we want the direction of the space to go. That's okay. And so I think believing in your power and your team's power, those around you, the advisors that you have access to, leveraging the tools in your toolkit to believe, why shouldn't I be the landmark case that opens doors? Instead of, I want to make sure I don't get it slammed in my face. It's tough. Nobody wants to be there, but I really think that that's, if we shift perspective just a little bit, we may have some more willing participants to experiment, get creative, and continue building.
That is so powerful. I will be quoting for myself, at least, this idea of careful often is stopping before consequence, but really it needs to be a bit of a deeper trust that you have resiliency to figure it out and that it's not binary. It's not like yes or no, or black or white, or you're bad and you're good. And right. I think if we can get more comfortable in the gray zones and operating in that uncertainty and the ambiguity, we realize that like all rules come from the exploration in that space. And exactly. It's crazy to not enter it just because it's not defined. And I love that so much. Kaylan, how can we keep in touch with what you're building personally, you as a leader, and then what Magnetic and Gotham are doing? Where can we follow your journey?
So I am on Twitter at Kaylan_Sliney. Magnetic is at magnetic_XYZ. We don't really tweet from Gotham, but that's gothamlabs.co in your browser. And on LinkedIn, I am pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn. So please, by all means, DM me, reach out. Let's talk, let's ideate, let's create, and let's break things nicely.
Nicely. Moving into the gray zone, into, where all good things come from. I will definitely be following along. I'm so grateful to know you and that you exist in this space and are leading in such a empowering, great way. So thanks so much. And we'll definitely be in touch.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.